On a bright summer day in 1969, Daisy Neely Mallory died peacefully in the house on Adams Avenue where she had lived for over 86 years. She was 98 years old, and except for her first 12 years, when she lived less than a block away, she had lived in the house all of her life. She had been a child there, and a young woman, and then had raised her own children in this magnificent mansion that was surely the envy of thousands of ordinary Memphians. By the time of her death, the once opulent neighborhood had fallen on hard times. It was no longer referred to as Millionaire's Row, as it had in its heyday, but was simply an increasingly decrepit and forgotten neighborhood that the growing city had passed by and forgotten long ago. Daisy Mallory was the last of her kind, the lone character left on the stage in a drama that had seen Memphis grow from a rough and tumble river town to one of the largest and most important cities in the South. But this was not to become the final chapter for the neighborhood now called Victorian Village. Time and fate had something else in store for these few remaining houses, standing on a mostly silent street within view of the river. Today we view them as the museums they've become, places of stillness and reverence, a notion that belies the life and vitality of those individuals who once lived and loved and played and entertained inside the stately mansions. What remains is a treasure, a view into the very heart and soul of our city from an age long ago. The view from Adams Avenue. General Andrew Jackson, General James Winchester, and Judge John Overton were considered the founders of Memphis, even though scores of Native Americans had inhabited the area for hundreds of years. There had also been Spanish and French outposts situated on the Fourth Chickasaw Bluff. The proprietors, as they were known, saw Memphis purely as a real estate venture. The city on the bluff grew rapidly. Immigrants made their way south and quickly cashed in on the new technologies of the day.
Memphis was established in 1819, and it was a rough, raw frontier river town. And certain amounts of that character retained with it, its growth. But when the 1850s, it goes through a great building boom, and there's something else that many people don't realize. A large portion of the population of Memphis in the surrounding era in the 1850s were northern craftsmen. They came here because southern cities were growing, Memphis in particular, at such a rate they could make much more money here than they could in the north.
The cities are trying to attract as much capital into the areas as they possibly can. And the ones that are the most successful are the ones that really kind of jump off into the huge construction that's going on.
The people who built the magnificent structures here were generally not of the first settlers in Memphis. The original proprietors, Jacksons, Winchesters, Overtons, McLemores, of course the Jacksons never lived here. The people who were present at the very beginning did not own property here. But these were people who made up the social and economic elite of Memphis at the time. When you reflect on the grandeur of these homes, the thickness of the walls, the interior decor, the money that had to go into building them, you are not dealing with an ordinary home of a Memphian in the Victorian era.
If we're looking at the second half of the 19th century, The population of Memphis is growing exponentially. And now we're moving with transportation systems, with railroads coming through, with, of course, the river still here, but we're looking at people coming in by the hundreds and literally by the thousand. We have a nice mix of Germans, French, Swiss, Italians, Irish. We know that we have that population coming in. We have, of course, some of the Irish being some of the working class, the true working class, and we also had the African Americans that had come here in great numbers throughout the South, who had come to Memphis to gather together and also to find employment off of the agricultural paradigm that they had worked on. So we had that mix going, and then we had the opportunists that were coming to indeed capitalize on our raw products distribution, which we're always known for. So that translates to cotton, and that translates to river and rail.
They were entrepreneurs. I don't think they all came from the elite class in the beginning. I think Mr. Fontaine possibly did. Woodruff and his brother started out in the carriage business up in New Jersey, and he saw an opportunity to expand his business and came to Memphis. And because he was successful in that business, they were attracted to him, other businessmen, and they got him involved in other things. Goya, the same way. Goya was a molasses merchant and a grocer who lived on the corner, and he became a president of a bank. Fontaine at one time, I believe, was the president of a bank. The number of people with big money was rather limited.
I've got to think my family was smart. They were certainly successful, many of them were. But I think part of it had to do with being in the right place at the right time. And Memphis was a booming cotton market, warehousing center, and transportation on the river, and then to moving from the river to the railroads, and then to trucks and now to air. They had to be in Memphis to take advantage of those transportation assets. Whether they were any smarter than anybody else, it's hard to say. Certainly it helps to be lucky too at times.
The folks in the Victorian village were folks that had already experienced some of the new technologies of the time, because it was their business savvy that enabled them to accrue the wealth that allowed them to build these magnificent homes. I think they probably had a certain amount of privilege, but I think they worked for it. I think they were people that deserved to reward themselves with the beauty of the surrounding area here.
I think it shows the opulence. I think it shows the discretionary income, the ability to acquire wealth in Memphis, and to be able to show that in domicile ways, as well as the kind of things and parties and societal entrapments that come along with affluence.
This site has not always been called Victorian Village. At one time, it was, I would say, one of the two upscale and exclusive residential neighborhoods of the city of Memphis. One was along Beale Street in the early period. The only real remnant of which is left there is the Hunt Phelan House. But here, you had a place which seems unbelievable to people today, that it was suburban at the time in the 600 block, counting away from the river, but it was. This was really outside the city core, and when you went past this area, you were really getting into countryside.
This was an outpost, really. It was quite a distance from the center of downtown, and you would have to navigate a swamp to get to the downtown area. The house that I live in now, it was built in 1861. And of course, we have these huge mansions, one block over on Adams, but this street, Jefferson, was townhouses. A lot of them were cotton planters that had their main residence outside. For instance, the Sledge family from Sledge, Mississippi had this house, and they would come up for cotton trading and that sort of thing. But their main residence, the bulk of the family, would stay down at the plantation.
People who occupied this were involved in banking and investment and transportation and things that made money. They could afford to live on a scale reflected in these homes of so many different rooms, so much beautiful decoration, so much architectural detail.
America is built upon the successive layers of nouveau riche.
The war between the states began in April of 1861, when Confederate forces fired upon Fort Sumter in South Carolina's Charleston Harbor. Memphis, being the center of the U.S. cotton market and a junction for important rail lines, figured heavily into both Union and Confederate plans. The Battle of Memphis on June 6, 1862, was a short affair, lasting only a few hours. As many as 10,000 Memphians watched the Union victory from the river bluff. Soon after the river battle, Memphis became Union headquarters for Army General Ulysses S. Grant. Union forces occupied the city through the end of the war in April of 1865.
In the first days of the war, when the Union occupation occurs, they come in and what do they fortify? They don't bring fortifications out here. They fortify the bridges across the Gayoso Bayou, and those bridges were the gateway to the city. Cross Adams, cross Linden, cross Poplar. Living in an occupied war zone is especially rough on civilians and especially rough on individual soldiers of the occupying army if they get out by themselves. And that was Memphis during the Civil War, Shelby County. I believe that it's here that Sherman and Grant, W.T. Sherman and Ulysses S. Grant, come into the city expecting latent Union sympathies to spring forth. Union flags will be brought out of the closets and they'll be welcomed as liberators, and they're not. And I think reality begins to hit them in the face. And I think that the concept of carrying war to the Southern people to defeat their will to resist begins to really take form here. It is under Union orders that 2 regiments, I believe, of Missouri Cavalry go across the river and burn the town of Hopefield, Arkansas, which is right where the Hernando de Soto Bridge cuts through, because they're sheltering and harboring Confederate partisans. William T. Sherman made the comment that the city was more valuable to the Confederacy as an occupied city than it was as a Confederate city. American industry just is slingshot forward. The war itself pulls together the need for iron and the establishment of the Transcontinental Railroad. Gosh, can you imagine the amount of steel, iron for engines, for tracks, for spikes, for carriages. Great demand there. Well, of course, there's a spinoff. You've got to have iron ore from the mines. You've got to have coal to smelt it. You've got to have wood for the runners. You've got to have all sorts of things. And so it creates great opportunities for this wage labor. The Mississippi River, throughout much of our nation's history, is FedEx, UPS, the Interstate 40, Interstate 55, the New 16, all of them rolled into one. And who sat in astride of that great crossroads of distribution, the fourth Chickasaw Bluff city known as Memphis. So it is an opportunity for those who are willing, daring, energetic enough to go out and take the bull by the horn and make some money, and they do. They've made a lot of money, and if they came back today, and if you were able to take that wealth and expand it to what the dollars would be today, they would be welcome in the same social circles and the same clubs that Bill Gates could walk into. No one would have to hold their head down.
This is that great period of American invention. This is the second industrial revolution. And, you know, we shouldn't maybe lock ourselves into thinking that that industrial revolution didn't include the South, because it did, you know, and all of these things that are the benefits of industrialization, you know, they come to the South as well.
So what you had was the growth of new entrepreneurs who were extremely successful. And yes, money and transportation, the Lee Steamboat Line, the Union Bank and the Planters Bank, and the National Bank of Commerce, those were built by people who really made their success in business after returning from the Civil War. So you do have a great deal of social mobility in which people who had the enterprise and the imagination and the aggressiveness to be successful could acquire places like this.
There are about 18 rooms on 3 floors. The ceilings here on the first floor are 16 feet, 14 on the second, 13 on the third. And then, of course, there are a couple of tower rooms above that. Very ostentatious, very, so much so that I think Mrs. Goria next door said to her husband, "Honey, they have a tower on that house next door. I want a tower." And the house at that point didn't have one and faced onto the side street, Orleans. And this is my conception, that once she said that, they hired Edward Couliot Jones, and he put the big, beautiful ballroom on the front and put the tower up there, and so she was equal to the next door neighbor. I think I would have too if I'd had the money.
These were certainly not the working class. These were people who knew how to negotiate contracts, who had seen pieces of the action in other places, were able to travel, had networks that were able to know this is how you do this, and this is how you capitalize on something, and how you indeed do capitalize something.
I think they were very intelligent, good business people. Fontaine came here from St. Louis, married a girl from Raleigh, and bought this house from Woodruff's family, or from the people that Woodruff had sold it to, I think. And he was very successful, and he formed partnerships with Memphians like Napoleon Hill, who owned a house at the corner of 3rd and Madison where the Steric building is. It was a big ugly pile, all stone and ugly, and a lot of money, and it said, "Lots of money here." The house was built in 1870, completed in 1871. We take February 1871 as its birthday because all the men who worked on the house signed a door here in the house and signed it February 11th, 1871. We think our ghost is Molly Woodruff. Molly Woodruff married here in the parlor in 1872 at Christmas time, shortly after the house was finished. And she and her husband, Egbert, is that a name for you? Egbert Wooldridge, moved in here, and we think that probably the rooms on the west side on the second floor became a suite of rooms for them. There was also the little room at the back that probably was intended to be a nursery and started out that way. They had a baby that died almost immediately. And about 6 months later, Egbert went out on a fishing trip, I think it was, and fell out of the boat, developed pneumonia, and died. She continued to live here until she met her second husband, married and moved away over on Poplar. By that time, her family was ready to move out of this house, and they moved over there with her. She had another baby.